It started with a scream that didn't quite sound like a scream. Residents of Willow Creek, a picturesque subdivision outside Raleigh, North Carolina, first thought it was a bird caught in the filters of the community pool. The shrill echo cut to the gold of the setting sun, bounced off vinyl fences, and hung there. Then came splashing, frantic and uneven. At 6:14 p.m., a jogger named Tina Mendez stopped near the wrought iron gate that enclosed a pool and tennis court. Through the glassy shimmer of water, she saw something small, a child's hand, pressing against the inside of the locked gate, fingers white from strain. Tina dropped her phone in the grass, vaulting the fence. She hit the deck barefoot, knees scraping concrete. "Hold on, baby," she yelled. The water was deep and still except for that desperate arm thrashing near the drain. By 6:18 p.m., paramedics were on their way. The child, later identified as Devin Reese, an 8-year-old black boy who lived 2 streets over, was pulled from the shallow end, trembling and sobbing but alive. When his mother arrived minutes later, screaming his name, no one knew yet that what happened wasn't an accident. They only knew that the pool gate was locked from the outside, and Devin had been inside alone. Willow Creek was the kind of neighborhood that sold itself in brochures. Manicured lawns, seasonal reeds, pastel houses reflected in ponds stocked with carp. The Homeowners Association, the Willow Creek Property Council, promised peace through standards. Every hedge had a measured height, every mailbox a matching brass number. Dissent, when it existed, stayed behind closed doors or anonymous emails. At the top of the HOA pyramid stood Martha Denton, 49, vice president of the council and self-appointed guardian of neighborhood integrity. To outsiders, she was polite, poised, always in pressed linen, clutching her lemon water tumbler. Inside the community, she was feared. Her husband, Greg Denton, coached youth soccer and smiled too much. Together they embodied the idyllic suburban couple. But behind their double-paned windows, Martha kept files, literal files, on every homeowner. Paint colors, visitor logs, photos from her Ring doorbell. So when the news spread that a child had nearly drowned at the pool, people whispered Martha's name immediately. Not out loud, but behind closed blinds. Monique Reese moved into Willow Creek a year earlier after saving for nearly a decade. A single mother and nurse, she bought the smallest house on the edge of the development, one that still smelled faintly of primer and possibility. Devin was the kind of kid who made friends easily. He'd skateboard down the cul-de-sac, handing out popsicles from a cooler. To him, the pool was a place of joy, of splash fights and cannonballs. He didn't know that, technically, he needed an approved resident ID to enter without his parent. Monique tried to follow every HOA rule, paint color, trash bin hours, mailbox polish, but she couldn't ignore the stares. At board meetings, Martha addressed her with that measured civility that hides contempt. "We're glad to have diversity in our community, Ms. Reese." When Monique saw the blue bruises blooming on Devin's wrist that night, she thought of Martha's smile. The next morning, the HOA email blast went out. Incident at the community pool last evening. No serious injury reported. Gate malfunction suspected. Facilities team will investigate. Please refrain from speculation. But the gate hadn't malfunctioned. Officer Ryan Calhoun from the county sheriff's office found a padlock, a second one, looped through the latch, not HOA issued. Someone had locked the gate after Devin entered. Devin told police he'd been let in by Mrs. Denton. She'd been watering plants nearby and waved him toward the pool when he asked if it was open. Then he said she closed it and walked away. Calhoun raised an eyebrow. "You're sure it was her?" Devin nodded. She had the pink cup. She always has it. When Calhoun questioned Martha later that day, she smiled as though he'd asked about a bake sale. "That poor child," she said. "I wasn't even home." But her Ring doorbell footage, subpoenaed a week later, told a different story. The footage showed Devin walking toward the pool gate, towel slung over his shoulder, sun glinting off his wet hair. Martha appeared from her side yard, watering can in one hand, tumbler in the other. She unlocked the gate, spoke briefly, then ushered him inside. For minutes later, she reemerged, alone, and slipped a small silver padlock through the gate latch. Then she walked home. When investigators confronted her, Martha's face drained. I don't remember that, she stammered. It must have been earlier in the day. But timestamps don't lie. The sheriff's office opened a formal child endangerment case. And Willow Creek, for the first time, split in two. At the next HOA meeting, the clubhouse overflowed. Neighbors packed folding chairs, fanning themselves with bylaws pamphlets. Martha sat rigid at the front table, her pearl necklace glinting. "This is being blown out of proportion," she said. The lock was to keep unsupervised children safe. Monique stood, voice shaking. "You locked my child in, not out." Gasps rippled. Someone whispered, "She's playing the race card." Another muttered, "It's always about race now." By the meeting's end, nothing was resolved, except the invisible line dividing those who believed Martha and those who saw a pattern long ignored. For years, minority residents have been fined more often, cited for yard clutter or improper decor. One Latina family's Christmas lights were deemed too bright. Another black couple's basketball hoop disrupted the visual harmony. Now, with Devon's near drowning, those fines look like warnings that no one wanted to name aloud. The county assigned Detective Laura Kincaid, known for her methodical patience. She interviewed every resident whose house faced the pool. One witness, a retired teacher named Elaine Porter, said she'd seen Martha near the pool that evening but was too tired to get involved. When Kincaid pressed, Elaine admitted something else. "A week before, Martha told me she was sick of that boy running around like he owned the place." The detective's notes underlined that boy 3 times. Still, motive mattered. Why would a woman of Martha's status risk everything? Kincaid's theory formed quietly. Control. Martha craved order, feared disorder, and viewed certain families as exceptions to neighborhood image. Devon was loud, joyful, unpredictable, the opposite of what she curated. But proving intent meant digging deeper, and Martha had friends in high places. Within days, the HOA's legal counsel intervened. They released a statement. The council supports Mrs. Denton, who has served this community with dedication. We caution against premature judgment. Behind the scenes, Martha's husband called in favors. Emails between board members, later leaked, revealed a coordinated effort to discredit Monique. One read, "Perhaps the mother left the gate open herself. Let's remind residents of personal responsibility." When Monique read those words, an anonymous envelope slid under her door. She cried for the first time since the incident. The same night, her tires were slashed. Devon stopped talking about the pool. He'd wake at night gasping, convinced he was still underwater. His therapist said he was exhibiting early signs of acute trauma response. One afternoon, Monique found him sitting at the window, staring at Martha's house. She was smiling, he whispered. "When I was in the water, she watched me." Monique turned toward him. "You saw her?" He nodded. She was at the fence. Then she walked away. That single statement reshaped the case from negligence to intent. Enter Ethan Cole, an investigative reporter for the Carolina Ledger. When he got the tip, he expected another HOA squabble. But after he viewed the footage and the leaked emails, he sensed something deeper. A systemic bias disguised as neighborhood governance. He started digging. Public records, complaint logs, meeting transcripts. What emerged was a decade-long paper trail of racially skewed enforcement. 80% of fines, warnings, and citations targeted minority homeowners, though they made up only 20% of residents. Ethan's first article dropped 3 weeks later. When safety becomes segregation, the hidden power of HOAs. The internet exploded. National outlets picked it up. Willow Creek became synonymous with suburban prejudice. And that's when threats began, not to Martha, but to Monique. Anonymous letters appeared in her mailbox. "Leave before it gets worse." Spray paint on her fence. Liar. A dead bird left on her porch. The sheriff's office increased patrols, but Martha's supporters insisted Monique was fabricating drama for attention. Martha herself went on local TV. "I've received death threats," she said tearfully, wearing a cross necklace. "All I ever wanted was safety for our children." Detective Kincaid watched the broadcast from her office, jaw tight. She'd interviewed over 20 residents. Half contradicted Martha's alibi. yet none were willing to testify publicly. "We have a town afraid of its reflection," she told her captain. Under mounting pressure, the state attorney ordered a full audit of Willow Creek's HOA records. Auditors uncovered what Ethan had suspected: discriminatory fines, selective enforcement, and missing funds funneled into community security upgrades. One of those upgrades, the second padlock system Martha used on the pool gate. Invoices showed the lock was built as a temporary safety measure, authorized by the HOA vice president, Martha herself. It was the smoking gun Kincaid needed. She filed for an arrest warrant on charges of child endangerment and obstruction. But before officers could serve it, Martha vanished. Greg Denton reported his wife missing at 9:42 p.m. She went for a walk and never came back, he told dispatch, voice trembling. Her car was still in the driveway, purse untouched. The only thing missing was her phone and her tumbler. The next morning, surveillance from a gas station 5 miles away showed her filling up a silver SUV not registered in her name. She wore sunglasses and a baseball cap. Behind her, in the passenger seat, a man with a familiar face. Paul Lang, the HOA president. Detective Kincaid froze the frame. Paul Lang had publicly condemned Martha days earlier. Now they were running together, searching Martha's house. Investigators found a hidden file cabinet behind a panel in her home office. Inside, hundreds of manila folders labeled by address. Photos, complaint notes, copies of ID cards. In Devin's folder were printed screenshots from neighborhood social media threads, comments criticizing his unsupervised behavior. At the bottom lay a handwritten note. "Some people don't belong here. They ruin everything we built." It wasn't just Martha. The files contained signatures from other board members approving various corrective measures. The racism wasn't isolated. It was institutional. But one file stood out, a thick envelope labeled Lang, private. Inside were bank statements linking HOA funds to a shell landscaping company Martha and Paul secretly co-owned. The motive now expanded beyond prejudice. Money. They'd been laundering HOA funds through fake maintenance projects for years. Devin's incident threatened exposure. The perfect storm of control, hate, and greed. A week later, police tracked Martha's SUV to a motel outside Savannah. The room was empty except for a tumbler and a crumpled HOA ledger. Receipts showed withdrawals totaling over $180,000. Kincaid suspected Martha and Lang were heading south, possibly planning to flee by boat. But the trail ended at the docks. Only tire marks, no witnesses. Then a fisherman came forward. He'd seen 2 people arguing near the pier that night. The woman screamed something like, "You said no one would get hurt." Then the man shoved her. The fisherman didn't see anyone fall, just heard the splash. Divers scoured the murky water. They found nothing. 2 months passed. Devin returned to school, quieter but stronger. Monique sold her house, refusing to live under the shadow of what happened. The state dissolved the Willow Creek HOA. Residents cheered at first, until they realized how much power they'd surrendered for so long without question. Ethan Cole's follow-up documentary aired nationwide. Its closing line echoed in living rooms across America. Willow Creek wasn't unique. It was simply the one that got caught. Detective Kincaid was promoted, though the case still haunted her. Martha's body never surfaced. Paul Lang disappeared entirely. And then, 6 months later, a new envelope arrived at Monique's apartment. No return address. Inside, a photo of Devin at the pool, taken the day of the incident, from an angle that shouldn't have been possible. On the back, scrawled in blue ink, "You save him once. Next time, you won't be there." Authorities reopened the case, suspecting Martha might still be alive. Rumors spread that HOA board members in nearby towns were receiving anonymous donations through the same shell companies. Detective Kincaid stared at the photo under fluorescent light, tracing the edges with a pen. The reflection in the pool water showed 2 figures, Devin and a woman behind the fence. But in that reflection, her face wasn't Martha's. It was someone else. Someone still living in Willow Creek. Kincaid picked up the phone. "We've got a bigger problem," she said. Outside, thunder rolled over the quiet suburb, and the pool lights flickered back on for the first time since the accident. Detective Laura Kincaid couldn't sleep. The photo lay under the glow of her desk lamp. Glossy, recent, impossibly real. Devon at the pool. The sunlight was identical to that evening's footage, yet the angle came from inside the maintenance shed, a place no cameras covered. And that reflection, the faint outline of a woman behind the gate, her features blurred, her posture tense. Not Martha Denton. The woman's silhouette had broader shoulders, shorter hair. Kincaid circled it in red ink. Who the hell are you? The timestamp was 2 days before the photo arrived in Monique's mail. That meant someone was still watching. When Monique opened her door that morning, she noticed the porch mat was slightly askew. Beneath it, another envelope. This one contained a note. Stop talking to the press. She hadn't spoken to the press since Ethan Cole's follow-up. Someone was keeping tabs, close tabs. Devon's school counselor called later that day, her tone careful. Ms. Reese, Devon mentioned a man taking pictures of him by the playground. Monique's grip tightened on the phone. Did the man talk to him? No, but Devon said he had a badge. That word froze her blood. Journalist Ethan Cole had moved past the Willow Creek piece, or so he thought. He'd won awards, landed a podcast deal. The scandal had made his career. But something about that final envelope nagged at him. The phrasing, the ink, even the paperweight felt institutional. When he ran the paper through a forensic UV test at a friend's print lab, faint impressions appeared on the backside. The watermark read, property of WCPC, Willow Creek Property Council. But the HOA had been dissolved 6 months ago. Ethan's mind raced. Who's still using the letterhead? After the state dismantled Willow Creek's HOA, management of the subdivision fell to a private realty firm, Northgate Community Services. The company promised restoration and fairness. But when Ethan pulled their registration file, he found a familiar name on the incorporation form. Paul Lang as consultant. Lang had disappeared along with Martha. Ethan printed the document and stared at the ink, heart pounding. Lang wasn't gone. He'd simply changed the sign on the door. That same week, a maintenance worker cleaning debris from the lake behind the Denton house called 911. Something had surfaced, not a body, but a tumbler, pink, etched with Martha's initials. Inside was a folded note protected in plastic. You think the pool was the only one. Detective Kincaid stood by the shoreline as divers fanned out. The water rippled like liquid glass, reflecting the ruins of reputation. She pocketed the tumbler bag, whispering, "She's not done." Kincaid reopened the Denton file officially. Evidence rooms were combed through again, digital forensics rerun. When analysts decrypted Martha's deleted text messages, a new string emerged, one she exchanged with burner number weeks before Devon's incident. Martha, the optics are bad. They won't renew funding. Unknown, then we make an example. Martha, he's just a child. Unknown, symbolism matters. Kincaid slammed her notebook shut. Funding for what? The answer came buried in an HOA subfolder labeled Community Protection Grant. Within were budget memos addressed to a state environmental agency, signed by Dr. Alyssa Coleman, a name that appeared on several other towns' improvement grants. Except Dr. Coleman wasn't an environmental scientist. She was a front for shell transfers, a network funneling federal money into private security contracts managed by Lang's affiliates. The HOA wasn't just racist. It was a laundering arm for a multi-town corruption pipeline. 2 nights later, patrol cars swept Devon School after hours. Officer reports described a man matching Paul Lang's build sitting in a black sedan near the fence line. The car sped off when approached, plates obscured. Inside the glove box, left deliberately open, was a thumb drive labeled WC Archive. Detective Kincaid plugged it into a secure terminal at the precinct. The files contained surveillance footage from multiple neighborhoods, Pinewood Hills, Maple Ridge, and Willow Creek, all under different HOAs, all using the same format for violation notices, the same code numbers for residents. Each file was marked with letters, R, B, L, and a final column titled Phase 2. When she opened the Phase 2 folder, her stomach dropped. It contained photos of homeowners, nearly all black or Latino, annotated with timestamps, GPS data, and coded notes like observe, discipline, remove. The HOAs weren't just enforcing rules. They were conducting targeted harassment campaigns under the guise of community safety. And the Denton case had been the spark they couldn't contain. Ethan couldn't resist. He'd promised Monique he wouldn't publish anything until she felt safe. But when he saw what Kincaid uncovered, the Phase 2 documents, he knew it was bigger than them all. He aired a teaser episode of his podcast Suburban Shadows with distorted clips and partial redactions. The episode went viral overnight. Within hours, Northgate Community Services office was vandalized. Windows smashed, files burned. And someone hacked Ethan's laptop. His screen glitched, displaying a single message in white letters. You don't understand who you're dealing with. That night, his car alarm went off 3 times. On the 4th, the alarm didn't sound at all, because the battery cables had been cut. One rainy evening, Monique was locking up when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a woman, soaked, trembling, face pale. "Martha?" she whispered. It was her, but not the woman from the news. Martha looked thinner, haunted. Her once perfect hair was streaked with gray. "Please," Martha said. "You need to listen. They'll kill us both." Monique hesitated. Every instinct screamed to shut the door. But something in Martha's eyes, terror, not guilt, stopped her. Martha stepped inside, clutching a folder against her chest. "They made me do it." Lang. The board. It wasn't about Devin. It was about leverage. Leverage for what? Monique asked. Martha's voice cracked. Control. Every HOA, every grant, every fine. It was data. They were testing how far they could push people. Who'd fight back, who'd leave. Monique stared in disbelief. Testing? For what purpose? To sell it, Martha said. They called it the compliance program. Kincaid arrived minutes later after Monique's panic call. She found Martha sobbing on the couch, clutching the folder. Inside were printouts, not just of Willow Creek, but of 7 other communities, all under the same management chain. Each had its own incident. Fires, false citations, fabricated violations, all targeting minority families. They wanted fear, Martha said. Fear keeps property values predictable. "Where's Lang?" Kincaid demanded. Martha's gaze drifted to the window. "He's everywhere. You can't find him because he is Northgate." When pressed about Devin, her voice broke. "They told me to scare her off, make an example. They said it would be safe. They said the cameras wouldn't see." "Who told you?" Martha looked at Kincaid, defeated. "A woman named Dr. Coleman. She said it was protocol." Using Martha's intel, Kincaid obtained a search warrant for Northgate's main data center. The raid took place at dawn. Rows of servers, labeled by subdivision codes, hummed under blue light. The data mirrored everything from the thumb drive, surveillance, correspondence, even biometric access logs linking Lang, Coleman, and several other high-ranking HOA presidents. But just as agents began imaging the drives, an internal system command initiated a data purge. Every screen went black. A single phrase flashed across monitors. "Compliance complete." Then silence. The server self-encrypted beyond recovery. Kincaid slammed her fist on the console. They knew we were coming. Someone inside law enforcement had tipped them off. 2 days after the raid, Martha was placed under witness protection pending federal testimony. She stayed in a motel outside Raleigh under an alias. On the 3rd night, the U.S. Marshal assigned to her stepped out for coffee. When he returned, the room door was ajar. Martha was gone. On the bed lay her tumbler, the same pink one, filled halfway with murky pool water. And on the mirror, written in condensation, "Still watching." Meanwhile, Devin began drawing again. His therapist noticed recurring shapes in his sketches. A figure behind a fence, a reflection, a pink cup. But one new detail emerged. The figure now wore a badge. "Do you know who this is?" the therapist asked gently. Devin hesitated. "He's the man who told Mrs. Denton what to do." "There was another man?" He nodded. He watched from the parking lot. He said the pool was part of his job. The drawing showed a logo on the badge, Northgate Security Division. The pool incident wasn't spontaneous. It was rehearsed. Ethan met Kincaid at a roadside diner outside town. He was jittery, eyes darting to the window. "They're still active," he whispered. "Northgate's not a company. It's a shell for a network called Civitas Watch. They use HOA data to predict social volatility." Kincaid frowned. "Predict?" He nodded. "They sell it to developers, insurance companies, even political PACs. They can tell which neighborhoods will resist policy changes based on how homeowners respond to enforcement pressure. And the racial bias?" Ethan looked up. "That's the algorithm. It learns who complies fastest, and it's trained on prejudice." He slid a flash drive across the table. "Here, everything I could say before the purge." But before Kincaid could examine it, headlights flooded the diner window. A black SUV screeched into the lot. "Get down!" Ethan shouted. Gunfire shattered the glass. When the smoke cleared, Ethan was bleeding from the shoulder. The SUV sped away. He clutched Kincaid's wrist. "If I don't make it, look for the blue ledger. That's where Lang keeps the master list." Ethan survived the shooting but went into hiding. Kincaid tracked a clue through financial records, uncovering a series of safe deposit boxes registered to Blue Ledger LLC, a fake accounting firm tied to Northgate. One box, located in a rural bank near Asheville, hadn't been accessed since the week Martha vanished. Inside, a single binder, blue leather, embossed with the Northgate logo. The ledger listed over 50 communities nationwide, each with coded notations for incidents, responses, and status. Willow Creek's entry was marked success. At the bottom of the list was a new entry, Maple Hollow Estates. Pending activation. Kincaid's stomach twisted. Maple Hollow was only 20 miles away, newly built, just opening to buyers. Someone was preparing to repeat the experiment. When Kincaid showed her the ledger, Monique felt both fury and exhaustion. "They're starting again," she said quietly. "Yes," Kincaid admitted. "And they're smarter now. Everything's digital." Monique leaned forward. "Then we go public again. Expose them." Kincaid hesitated. "It could put you and Devin in danger." "Maybe," Monique said, eyes steady. "But silence almost killed my son once." "Not again." Together, they planned to leak the ledger to national media. Ethan would corroborate. Martha's files would serve as secondary proof. But the night before the scheduled handoff, Monique's apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, except her laptop. On the kitchen counter, written in black marker, "Maple Hollow opens tomorrow." Kincaid drove there at dawn. The neighborhood looked familiar. Manicured lawns, pastel homes, pristine pool under construction. A new HOA banner flapped in the breeze. "Welcome to Maple Hollow, managed by Northgate Community Services." She spotted a moving truck at Lot 9. A young black couple unloaded boxes, their toddler laughing beside a red wagon. Kincaid's throat tightened. "Not again," she murmured. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You're too late. Compliance begins today." She called for backup, but before she could finish the sentence, the pool lights flickered on. Water jets surged though no one had powered them. Then she saw it, a silver padlock glinting on the gate. The same design as Willow Creek. Federal warrants were issued for Paul Lang and Dr. Alyssa Coleman. Both vanished. Interpol traced shell accounts to the Cayman Islands, routing through real estate trusts connected to former political donors. Lang's last confirmed sighting was at a marina near Charleston, the same place Martha had allegedly disappeared. A fisherman recalled seeing a man matching Lang's description meeting with another suited figure. When shown photos, the fisherman identified him as a retired state senator who once chaired the Housing Oversight Committee. The corruption reached higher than anyone imagined. Months later, the abandoned Willow Creek pool was slated for demolition. Crews drained the stagnant water. At the bottom lay two objects, the remnants of a padlock and a waterproof flash drive. Inside the drive was a single folder labeled Reflection. It contained short clips from dozens of pool cameras, all taken after the subdivision's closure. Each showed night vision footage of different pools, each ending with the same chilling audio overlay. Observation complete. Subject compliant. And in the final clip, time-stamped just a week earlier, a woman in a hooded jacket placed something into the water. She looked up at the camera briefly. It was Martha Denton, alive. The footage ended abruptly, replaced by scrolling text. Phase 3, Urban Integration. Project launch, September 21st. Target, Raleigh Metro Expansion Zone. Kincaid's pulse hammered in her ears. That date was 2 weeks away. Raleigh Metro housed thousands. It wasn't a neighborhood. It was a city sector. The program was evolving. She turned to Monique. They're scaling it. It's not about HOAs anymore. Monique stared at the screen, voice trembling. Then who's next? Kincaid didn't answer. Outside, thunder rolled, mirroring that night months ago when Devin nearly drowned. The pool lights flickered once more before going dark completely. From the empty deck, a faint noise echoed, a soft metallic clink like a lock closing. And across town, at the gates of Maple Hollow Estates, a security guard in a Northgate uniform placed a new padlock on a freshly painted gate. He smiled faintly, checked his clipboard, and whispered into his radio. Phase 3 ready for testing. It was 6:42 a.m. on the day of the verdict when the skies over Maple Ridge turned the color of steel. Heavy clouds rolled low and slow, pressing against the town like the weight of unspoken guilt. The courthouse steps were already lined with cameras, microphones, and a restless crowd. Reporters murmured updates. Janet Cole's defense filed an emergency motion last night, denied. Lena Brooks will be present with her son, Eli. Public reaction's been intense. Protests expected. Inside his patrol car, Officer Grant Meadows watched from across the street. His eyes were tired, bloodshot from weeks of sleepless nights. The face of that little boy, Eli, haunted him still. He'd pulled him out of that HOA pool himself, coughing, terrified and blue. And now, as the case neared its conclusion, he couldn't shake one thought. What happens to a town after the truth burns through it? The Maple Ridge HOA had collapsed under its own rot. Financial ledgers uncovered by Nora Klein, the investigative reporter, revealed how Janet Cole and her husband had funneled HOA funds to silence complaints, mostly from black residents. Inspectors falsified reports. Board minutes vanished. Residents who dared to question community standards found their mailboxes smashed or their HOA fees doubled overnight. But what the court hadn't yet decided, what still hovered like a ghost, was whether Janet's act that day at the pool had been premeditated hate or reckless cruelty. The courtroom felt heavy with quiet. Every seat was filled. The jury had filed in, their expressions guarded, while Judge Morrell adjusted his glasses and nodded toward the witness stand. Mrs. Lena Brooks, he said gently, please proceed. Lena rose, steady in her teal blouse. Her hands trembled only once as she took the oath. The light from the tall window caught the faint scar on her wrist, the same one she got that day trying to pry open the pool gate while her son screamed beneath the surface. When she began to speak, the room leaned in. My son, Eli, loved swimming. He'd count down the days until the pool opened every summer. That morning, I packed him a towel, sunscreen, and a juice box. We were just there for a few minutes before Mrs. Cole walked up. She said he couldn't use the pool without me signing another form. I told her we'd already done that at the HOA office. She said it didn't matter, that certain people sometimes needed extra review. Her voice broke. When I turned to call my husband, she locked the gate. Eli was still inside. He was only 9. She said she'd teach him not to break rules. Then she walked away. Murmurs spread through the courtroom like a wave. Janet Cole didn't flinch. Her jaw was tight, her lips pressed into a faint smile that had once disarmed neighbors, now turned venomous. I screamed for help, Lena continued. When the lifeguard tried to unlock the gate, the key didn't fit. The HOA had replaced the locks that week, without telling residents. By the time Officer Meadows arrived, she stopped, voice catching. He pulled Eli out, coughing. If he'd been there 1 minute later, my son would have drowned. A single tear ran down her cheek. Then she looked directly at Janet. You didn't just lock my boy in a pool. You tried to remind him of his place. When the defense rose, the shift in tone was surgical. Janet's lawyer. A man named Thomas Greeley, slick-haired, pale, adjusted his cufflinks and spoke as if narrating a misunderstanding rather than a crime. Mrs. Cole has maintained from day one that this was a tragic accident, a miscommunication. There was never intent to harm. The HOA guidelines were being enforced to protect children, not endanger them. Mrs. Cole regrets deeply what happened. He turned toward the jury, voice warm, persuasive. Ask yourselves, do we punish an entire person's life for a single mistake? But Nora Klein, seated 2 rows back with her notebook, had already published her article that morning. It was titled, "The Lock and the Ledger, How Maple Ridge's HOA Weaponized Rules Against Its Own." Inside were leaked emails between Janet and Board Vice President Evelyn Marks, exposing their deliberate strategy to maintain neighborhood image integrity. The phrasing alone twisted stomachs. It was coded language, but everyone knew what it meant. One email, in particular, hit hardest. "We cannot let standards slip. You saw the crowd at the pool this weekend. If we start letting every family in, we'll lose control. Handle it quietly if you must." Janet Cole, June 12th. That was the day before Eli nearly drowned. By afternoon, thunder cracked over the courthouse. Rain streaked down the tall windows as the jury filed back in, solemn and pale. The foreman rose. On the charge of child endangerment, guilty. On the charge of unlawful confinement, guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault with intent to harm, guilty. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Janet Cole's husband, seated behind her, buried his face in his hands. But Janet? She only turned to the judge and smiled faintly, like someone who just lost a game she didn't believe was real. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Judge Morrell asked. She leaned forward. Her voice was calm, eerily calm. "You can call it racism, cruelty, whatever you want. I call it protecting what's ours. This town forgot its roots. I just reminded it." Lena Brooks closed her eyes. The judge's gavel hit the bench like thunder. 15 years without parole. Outside, the rain began to pour harder, washing over the courthouse steps as if the sky itself was trying to clean what human hands had stained. Weeks later, after the trial had ended, Nora received an unmarked envelope at her newsroom office. Inside, a USB drive and a short note that read, "You only saw half." The drive contained recordings from internal HOA meetings, audio clips, all dated over 3 years. In them, board members laughed about problem families, referenced code violations that didn't exist, and openly discussed ways to find them out of the neighborhood. But what chilled her most was the final recording. Janet's voice again, casual and confident. "They'll never prove intent. We use the rules. That's what rules are for." Nora played the file on loop, staring at her computer screen long after midnight. Maple Ridge wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a system designed to appear lawful while quietly enforcing exclusion. Janet Cole hadn't acted alone. She'd simply been the face of a mindset too many tolerated. Grant Meadows had seen justice in technical terms all his career. Charges, trials, sentences. But this case left a mark. He visited Lena and Eli a few weeks after the verdict. Eli had returned to school, but still flinched at the sight of water. His swim lessons were over. When Grant arrived, Eli ran to him, clutching a small toy police car. "You saved me," the boy whispered. Grant smiled sadly. "You saved yourself, kiddo. I just got there in time." But when he drove home that evening, something in his gut twisted. He knew other neighborhoods just like Maple Ridge existed across the county. Same bylaws, same unwritten codes, same quiet prejudice masked as policy. He opened his laptop that night and began writing a memo to the state attorney's office, a formal request to review every HOA complaint filed in the past 10 years. He titled it, "Patterns of Selective Enforcement, Racial Bias in Private Governance." Maple Ridge changed after the trial, but not in the way most expected. For months, realtors avoided the area. Property values dipped. The HOA disbanded, replaced by a temporary council of residents. The glossy sign at the entrance that once read, "Welcome to Maple Ridge, a standard of excellence," was torn down one night and never replaced. Lena Brooks became an advocate for housing equity. She gave interviews, spoke at City Hall, and helped other families file discrimination complaints. Her voice carried strength, not bitterness. "I don't want revenge," she told Nora in one of their last interviews. "I just want my son to live somewhere he's seen as a child, not a category." Nora's article series, The Pool Gate Case, went viral nationwide. She received hate mail and death threats, but also letters from people in dozens of other states, telling eerily similar stories. One note read simply, "It happened to us too, but we never had proof." 6 months later, on a humid evening, Lena heard footsteps on her porch. She opened the door to find Evelyn Marks, the former vice president of the HOA. Evelyn looked older, her posture bent, eyes rimmed red. "I came to apologize," she said softly. "I knew what Janet was doing. I didn't stop her." Lena folded her arms. "You helped her." "I was afraid," Evelyn admitted, "of losing my position, my friends, of being next." She looked out toward the darkened street. "We built this place on fear. We just called order." Lena didn't answer. She let the silence stretch until Evelyn's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," Evelyn whispered. Then she walked away, disappearing into the humid dark. A year later, Nora Klein's documentary premiered, The Rules We Hide Behind. It aired on national television, blending interviews, courtroom footage, and recordings from those HOA meetings. Viewers across the country sat stunned as they listened to the calm, smiling voice of Janet Cole explaining how she used bylaws to protect property values. The final image was a Maple Ridge pool, empty, drained, its metal gate padlocked once again. Only this time, a handmade sign hung from it in black paint. No more silence. The broadcast sparked investigations in 5 other states. Politicians issued statements. Lawsuits followed. The conversation had begun. On a bright afternoon, nearly a year to the day since the verdict, Lena and Eli visited the park near their new home. It wasn't Maple Ridge. It was a modest neighborhood in a nearby town. No HOA. No signs about community standards. Just kids running, laughter, the smell of grilled food in the air. Eli pointed to a small public pool across the park. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "can I try again? Just for a minute?" Lena looked at him, tears brimming but proud. "Yes, baby, you can." He stepped into the shallow end, splashing gently, smiling for the first time in months. And for that brief moment, everything, the pain, the trial, the headlines, faded. It was just a boy in water. That night, Nora received another envelope. No return address. Inside, a single photograph. A printed image of Janet Cole in prison laundry, standing by a cinder block wall. But behind her, faintly visible, was a guard wearing a Maple Ridge HOA pin on his uniform. On the back, scrawled in black ink, "It never really ends." Nora stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up a recorder and whispered into it. Part 3 of this story isn't about one woman or one neighborhood. It's about the quiet systems we let live because they were a friendly smile. The Pool Gate case of Maple Ridge became a turning point. Not because of the verdict, but because it exposed something deeper. Racism didn't always wear a hood or carry a weapon. Sometimes it carried a clipboard. Sometimes it smiled and waved while holding the keys. Rules, when used without conscience, can wound as deeply as hate. Lena's story taught that justice isn't just a gavel at the end. It's the courage to confront what everyone else pretends not to see. And for every town that insists it could never happen here, there's always someone whispering behind closed doors, but already did. As the credits rolled on the documentary's final broadcast, viewers across the country sat silent. Some wept, others looked away. But a question hung in the air, unspoken yet piercing. When rules become weapons, who will have the courage to unlock the gate? The screen faded to black, and the world, for one breathless moment, realized that the real crime was never just the act. It was the silence that allowed it.